The trucks rolled through the gates of Camp 18 at precisely 1430 hours on a November afternoon when the Yorkshire moors looked like battlefields waiting to happen, all grey stone and darker sky. November 3rd, 1944. Somewhere between the certainty of German defeat and a future where proud soldiers would become prisoners in a foreign land, Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner stood with 200 Wehrmacht officers watching British guards unlock the transport vehicles with an efficiency that felt almost respectful. When the camp commandant, Colonel James Whitmore, approached the first truck and said the words that would echo through prisoner accounts for the next 70 years, Friedrich felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Gentlemen," Whitmore said in flawless German, his posture parade ground straight, "you have fought with honour. You have surrendered with dignity. As fellow soldiers, we recognise this. You may keep your uniforms, your rank insignia, and your personal effects. You are prisoners of war, not criminals. Welcome to Camp 18. Friedrich stared at this British colonel who'd just called German prisoners gentlemen, who'd acknowledged their honour, who'd said they could keep their uniforms when every POW in every war expected to be stripped of rank, dignity, identity. And in that moment, Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, career Wehrmacht officer who'd spent 5 years believing the British were decadent, weak and incapable of understanding military virtue, felt something crack in the foundation of everything he'd been taught. Because the enemy he'd been trained to despise had just shown him more respect than his own command had given him in months. Before we go deeper into this extraordinary true story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from around the world. These stories of unexpected honour need to be remembered, and you're part of keeping them alive. Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, 36 years old, an industrialist's son from Hamburg, where discipline was taught before kindness and honour was the currency of social standing, had commanded an infantry company through France, Russia, and finally Normandy before being captured during the Allied breakout from the beachhead in August 1944. He'd expected execution. The British had every right after 5 years of war, after the Blitz, after the V2 attacks still hitting London. When execution didn't come, he'd expected humiliation, forced labour. The systematic destruction of military identity that turned soldiers into numbers. POW camps in Russia did that. Stalin's gulags broke men down to component parts and rebuilt them as something that served the state. Friedrich had heard stories. Officers forced to work alongside enlisted men, uniforms confiscated, rank badges stripped away. The deliberate erasure of everything that made a soldier instead of just another prisoner. But this British camp was different. Impossibly different. The guards stood at attention when officers passed. Not German officers, British officers. But the respect was there in their posture, in their bearing, in the acknowledgement that rank mattered even across enemy lines. Colonel Whitmore led the new arrivals to the officer barracks. Clean, heated, with beds that had actual mattresses instead of straw. "Your accommodations," Whitmore explained in his precise German. 2 men per room. Senior officers get private quarters. Meals in the officers' mess at €700, 1,200 and 1,800 hours. You'll be expected to maintain military discipline among your men. We enforce Geneva Convention protocols here. To the letter. Friedrich exchanged glances with Oberleutnant Hans Becker, his second in command, who'd been captured alongside him. Both men were thinking the same thing. This had to be a trick. A psychological operation designed to lower their guard before the real treatment began. Nobody treated POWs this well. Not Americans, not British, certainly not Germans. "There must be conditions," Friedrich said carefully. "Rules beyond Geneva Convention." Whitmore smiled. Thin, professional. "Of course, no escape attempts, no sabotage, no resistance to legitimate orders. In exchange, we treat you as we'd expect to be treated if positions were reversed. Fair?" "Fair," Friedrich echoed, the word feeling strange in his mouth. When had war ever been about fairness? That evening, the German officers gathered in their mess hall. A proper mess hall, not a canteen or a feeding station. with tables set with actual plates, not tin dishes, with food that smelled like food instead of punishment. And on each officer's chair, folded with military precision, was their uniform. Cleaned, pressed, rank insignia still attached. Friedrich picked up his tunic. The Hauptmann's shoulder boards were intact. The Iron Cross he'd earned on the Eastern Front was still pinned to his chest. The campaign ribbons that documented 5 years of service were arranged in proper order. Someone had not only cleaned his uniform, but had restored it to regulation standards. "This can't be real," Hans muttered beside him. "They're treating us like we're their own officers." "Maybe that's the point," Friedrich said slowly, understanding dawning like cold light. "Maybe they see us as fellow soldiers first and enemies second." A British captain entered the mess, young, maybe 28, with lieutenant's pips that suggested recent promotion. He addressed them in German that was adequate if not fluent. "Gentlemen, Colonel Whitmore extends his compliments and hopes you find the arrangements satisfactory. If any officer requires alterations to their uniform or has lost personal effects during capture, please inform the quartermaster. We'll do our best to accommodate reasonable requests." Friedrich stood. Protocol demanded it when addressing superior rank, even enemy rank. "Captain, why?" The British officer looked confused. "Why what, sir?" "Why this respect? Why allow us to keep our uniforms? We are your prisoners. You won the fight. You could do whatever you wanted. Why treat us as if we still matter?" The captain was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you do still matter. You're soldiers. You followed orders. You served your country with honor, even if your country's cause was wrong. That deserves recognition. We're fighting against Nazism, not against the concept of military honor itself." He paused. "And frankly, sir, if we treat you with dignity, perhaps you'll remember that dignity when this war ends. Perhaps you'll return to Germany knowing that the British weren't the monsters your propaganda described. Perhaps that matters more for the peace than treating you like animals matters for the war." Friedrich sat down slowly. This British captain had just articulated something Friedrich's own officers had never managed. That the point of war wasn't just winning. It was winning in a way that made peace possible afterward. Over the next weeks, Camp 18 became something Friedrich had never experienced. A military installation run on mutual respect between captors and captives. German officers maintained discipline among their men. British guards enforced camp rules without brutality. There were classes, lectures, a library with books in German, a sports field where prisoners could exercise. Church services conducted by a German chaplain who'd also been captured. It felt less like imprisonment and more like an extended military posting where you happened to be on the wrong side of the fence. But the real test came in December. Christmas 1944. Friedrich expected nothing. Christmas in a POW camp was usually just another day with slightly better food if you were lucky. Instead, Colonel Whitmore invited the German officers to a formal Christmas dinner in the British officers' mess. As guests, Friedrich stood in front of the British officers' mess at 1900 hours on Christmas Eve, wearing his dress uniform that had been returned to him cleaned and pressed, and wondered if he'd finally lost his mind. Behind him, 20 senior German officers waited with the same confusion. "This has to be a trap," Hans whispered. "No trap," Friedrich said. "Just the most elaborate act of psychological warfare I've ever witnessed, and it's working." They entered. The British officers' mess was decorated with evergreen branches and candles. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, and at the head table, Colonel Whitmore stood with his senior staff, all in dress uniform, waiting. "Gentlemen," Whitmore said, gesturing to the tables, "please be seated. Tonight, we celebrate not as captors and prisoners, but as soldiers marking a holiday that predates this war and will survive it." The dinner was extraordinary. Real meat, vegetables, bread that wasn't sawdust, wine, actual wine, served in actual glasses. And throughout the meal, British and German officers talked. Not about the war, about homes, families, the lives they'd had before uniforms made them enemies. Friedrich found himself seated next to a British major named Thomas Chamberlain, 40 years old, career officer, had fought in North Africa before being reassigned to POW administration. "Your German is excellent," Friedrich offered. "My English is terrible. Learned it at university," Chamberlain said. "Studied in Heidelberg before the war. Beautiful city. Wonderful beer." "You've been to Heidelberg?" "Spent a year there, 1933, just as things were changing." Chamberlain's voice carried weight. "I had German friends, Jewish friends who saw what was coming and left. German friends who stayed and—" He didn't finish. Friedrich set down his wine glass. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about what was happening. Not until it was too late to stop it. Not until we were all complicit by silence, if not action." "I know," Chamberlain said. "Most soldiers don't choose the wars they fight. They just choose how they fight them. You surrendered when your position was hopeless instead of getting your men killed for nothing. That's honor. That's what we're recognizing here." "But we're still the enemy," Friedrich said. "You're still the prisoner," Chamberlain corrected. "There's a difference. The war made us enemies. Peace will make us something else. Whitmore believes that. Thinks if we treat you like human beings, you'll go home and build a Germany that remembers humanity. It's an experiment. You're the test subjects." After dinner, Colonel Whitmore addressed both groups. British officers on one side, German officers on the other, both standing at attention out of ingrained respect for rank. "Gentlemen, tomorrow is Christmas, the day we celebrate hope in dark times. I cannot give you freedom, I cannot end this war, but I can give you this. Tonight, you are not prisoners. You are fellow soldiers marking a moment of peace in the middle of chaos. Tomorrow, we return to the reality of our situation. But tonight, we remember that beneath these uniforms, we're all just men far from home, hoping to survive long enough to see our families again." He raised his glass. "To peace. May it come swiftly, and may we all live to see it." "To peace," the room echoed. British and German voices mixing, and Friedrich felt something he hadn't felt since 1939. Hope. Not hope that Germany would win. That ship had sailed. Hope that after the war, after the defeat, after the reckoning, there might be something worth rebuilding. But the true test of Camp 18's philosophy came in January 1945. A German prisoner attempted escape. Unteroffizier Klaus Weber, young, foolish, desperate to get back to Germany despite the futility. He was caught 3 miles from camp, shivering in a ditch, his stolen civilian clothes soaked through. British guards brought him back. Friedrich expected execution, or at minimum, severe punishment that would make an example. Instead, Colonel Whitmore convened a court-martial, a proper military court-martial, with German officers serving as defense counsel, with rules of evidence, with the presumption that even prisoners deserve due process. Friedrich was assigned as Weber's defense officer. It was surreal. A German officer defending a German prisoner before a British military court that was treating the proceeding like it mattered. "Your defense?" "Hauptmann Steiner?" Whitmore asked after the prosecution had presented evidence. Friedrich stood. "Unteroffizier Weber violated camp rules. This is not in dispute. He attempted escape, which Geneva Convention recognizes as the duty of captured soldiers to attempt. I argue that while he broke camp regulations, he was acting consistent with his obligations as a soldier. I request punishment be limited to solitary confinement rather than execution or transfer to a harsher facility." Whitmore considered. "Unteroffizier Weber, do you have anything to say?" Weber stood, trembling, 23 years old and terrified. "I'm sorry, sir. I just wanted to go home. I know it was stupid. I know I broke the rules, but I had to try. Whitmore nodded. Your attempt to escape is understandable. Your method was poor. But the impulse is recognized under military law. 14 days solitary confinement, reduced rations, after which you return to regular prisoner status with no permanent mark on your record. This court is adjourned. Friedrich stared. Whitmore had just sentenced a German prisoner with mercy, had acknowledged escape attempts as legitimate military action, had treated Weber as a soldier making a tactical mistake, not a criminal deserving maximum punishment. Why? Friedrich asked after the court emptied. Why show him mercy? Because breaking him accomplishes nothing, Whitmore said. Crushing his spirit doesn't win the war. It just creates a broken man who'll go home hating Britain. But treating him fairly, showing him that even when he violated our rules, we still recognized his humanity. That builds something more valuable than punishment. It builds the foundation for peace. Friedrich walked back to his quarters, thinking about Colonel Whitmore's words. About a British officer who understood that how you won mattered as much as whether you won. About a camp where enemies were treated like fellow soldiers who happened to be on the wrong side. About the possibility that war didn't have to destroy everything human. That night, Friedrich started writing. Not official reports. Not military documentation. A personal account. A record of what he was experiencing. Of German prisoners being treated with dignity by the enemy they'd been taught to despise. Of British officers who enforced rules fairly and showed mercy when protocol allowed it. Of meals shared between captors and captives. Of Christmas dinners where nationality mattered less than shared military experience. What are you writing? Hans asked from the other bunk. A record, Friedrich said. So when we go home, we can tell people what happened here, so Germany knows that not all victories require cruelty, that not all defeats require humiliation, that there's another way. You think anyone will believe us? I think they have to, Friedrich said, because if Germans go home believing all victors are cruel, we'll spend the next war being cruel to prove we're strong. But if we go home knowing that strength and mercy can coexist, maybe we build something better. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. Hitler was dead. The Reich that had promised 1,000 years lasted 12. And in Camp 18, German prisoners who'd spent months being treated with dignity faced their final test: repatriation. Colonel Whitmore assembled the officers one last time. The same courtyard where he'd welcomed them in November. The same format. The same respect. Gentlemen, Germany has surrendered. The war is over. You will be repatriated to Germany over the coming months. I cannot promise what you'll find there, but I can promise this. You've been treated according to the standards we believe all soldiers deserve. Take that memory home with you. Remember that the British weren't your enemies. Nazism was. We fought against a system, not against you personally. And now that the system is gone, we hope you'll help build something better in its place. He paused. You may keep your uniforms, your rank insignia, your personal effects. You earned them through service, even if that service was to a cause we opposed. Honor doesn't die because you lost. It survives if you let it. Friedrich stepped forward. Colonel Whitmore, permission to speak? Granted, Hauptmann. On behalf of the German officers interned here, I want to say thank you for treating us like soldiers, for showing us that honor transcends nationality, for proving that the enemy we'd been taught to hate was more honorable than the government we'd been taught to serve. We won't forget, and we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to build a Germany worthy of the respect you showed us. Whitmore saluted, a proper military salute, to a German officer, to an enemy, to a man who'd just become something more complicated than prisoner or foe. Friedrich returned the salute and felt the war finally end, not with surrender, not with defeat, but with the recognition that even enemies could acknowledge each other's humanity. Friedrich returned to Hamburg in July 1945. Found his city destroyed, his family alive, but traumatized. A country trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. He spent the next 40 years helping rebuild Germany. Not the military Germany, the democratic one. The Germany that remembered that strength without mercy was just brutality with better uniforms. He became a teacher. Taught history to German students who needed to understand that their country's past was complicated but not irredeemable, who needed to know that honor could survive defeat if you chose to maintain it. And every year, on November the 3rd, the anniversary of his arrival at Camp 18, Friedrich would tell his students about the British colonel who'd let German prisoners keep their uniforms, who'd treated enemies like fellow soldiers, who'd shown that respect could survive war if people chose humanity over hatred. "Why does this matter?" a student asked him in 1982, 37 years after the war. A new generation that knew Hitler only from history books. "Because it proved something important," Friedrich said, "that how you treat defeated enemies defines who you are, more than how you treat victorious allies. Britain could have crushed us, humiliated us, destroyed whatever dignity we had left. Instead, they showed us respect, and that respect made it possible for us to rebuild with honor instead of resentment. That's why Germany and Britain are allies now, not because we forgot the war, but because they remembered we were human even when we'd forgotten it ourselves." In 1985, Friedrich received a letter from England, from Colonel James Whitmore, retired, living in Devon, 83 years old, and writing to thank the German officers who'd made Camp 18 work. "You could have resisted, could have made our jobs impossible. Instead, you maintained discipline, followed the rules, proved that the experiment worked, that treating prisoners with dignity wasn't weakness, but the foundation for lasting peace. Thank you for that, and thank you for taking the memory home, for building a Germany I'm proud to call an ally." Friedrich wrote back immediately, started a correspondence that lasted until Whitmore's death in 1990. Two old soldiers who'd been enemies, talking about the war they'd survived and the peace they'd helped build. Hans Becker, Friedrich's second-in-command at Camp 18, became a politician, served in the Bundestag, advocated for reconciliation with Britain, spoke frequently about the POW camp where he'd learned that enemies could become friends if both sides chose respect over revenge. Klaus Weber, the young soldier who'd attempted escape and been shown mercy, became a teacher like Friedrich. Dedicated his life to ensuring German students understood that honor wasn't about winning. It was about how you conducted yourself when everything else was stripped away. And Camp 18? It was closed after the war. The buildings demolished. The land returned to Yorkshire moors. But photographs survived, documents, personal accounts from 200 German officers who'd experienced something that shouldn't have been possible. In 2004, the British and German governments erected a memorial on the site, a simple stone marker that reads in both English and German. Here stood Camp 18, where from 1944 to 1945, German prisoners of war were treated with the dignity and respect befitting soldiers. British officers led by Colonel James Whitmore proved that honour transcends nationality, that respect survives defeat, and that the foundation for lasting peace is laid not in victory, but in how victors treat the vanquished. You may keep your uniforms. Friedrich Steiner attended the dedication at 96 years old, one of the last surviving officers from Camp 18. He stood before the memorial reading words he'd spent 60 years trying to explain to people who thought treating enemies with respect was weakness. A reporter asked him the obvious question. What did Camp 18 teach you that 5 years of war hadn't? Friedrich smiled, the same smile he'd worn when Colonel Whitmore had first said German prisoners could keep their uniforms. It taught me that the strongest nations are the ones confident enough to show mercy, that real honour isn't about dominating your enemies, It's about recognizing their humanity even when you've defeated them. Britain won the war, but Camp 18 won something more important. It won the peace. And 60 years later, I'm standing here as proof that how you treat your enemies determines what kind of world survives the war. This is the story they don't teach you. The one that doesn't fit neatly into tales of crushing victories and total defeat. The one that reminds us that even in the worst moments of human history, people chose dignity over degradation, respect over revenge, and built the foundation for peace, not through domination, but through the radical act of treating defeated enemies like fellow humans who'd simply been on the wrong side. If this story reminded you that history is more complex, more beautiful, and more hopeful than we usually admit, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Tell me if your family has stories like this. Tell me what we've forgotten that deserves to be remembered. Because at WW2 Declassified, we don't just tell war stories. We tell human stories that happen to take place during war. And those are the ones that matter most. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And I'll see you in the next story.